And then again, we're all Don Bacon's wife. And I say this a lot, and this is my new mantra.
Bacon and his wife, Angie, were college sweethearts. She's appeared in a few campaign ads and at events, but where she finds herself now is unenviable.
Don Bacon, remember, is this moderate from Nebraska, one of the most moderate, if you can call him a moderate, one of the most moderate people in the Republican Party. And when he opposed Jim Jordan for Speaker,
Bacon said his office has received numerous calls regarding his vote for Speaker, most of those coming from outside of the district.
he was treated just like Peter Strzok or Hunter Biden or Judge Merchant.
Phone calls, threats to primaries, and I get all that stuff. It's all right. But you start sending texts to my wife anonymously and calling her anonymously with threats. It's wrong.
One voicemail sent to his wife, which 3 News Now has obtained a copy of, lamented Bacon's lack of support for Jordan.
He is destroying the Republican Party.
Bacon isn't just sharing his frustration with the media.
But Mr. Jordan needs to make clear that this behavior is wrong, and there's been a bullying campaign.
He was treated with the same mob mentality as Trump's other enemies. And he described that his wife slept during that period with a gun under her pillow. Because he had done something very modest, which is oppose Jim Jordan as Speaker, all of a sudden he became the target of a really vicious mob.
American people don't want that.
And people who have been on the brunt end of that mob, they're either going to choose to fight back, and they're the rare ones, or they're going to choose to hunker down and do nothing to attract attention again. And I think that's the larger number, people who are terrified by that mob. Peter Meyer, right? He's rich. He's former military.
He was the first freshman, lawmaker ever to vote to impeach a president of his own party.
And when he voted to impeach Donald Trump, he started wearing body armor.
In an interview with Politico magazine, Meyer said he'll now support whomever the 2024 GOP nominee is. Amid little doubt, it's likely to be Trump. And he's doing more than that for the former president. He submitted a court filing arguing that Trump's name should be allowed to appear on Michigan ballots amid debate over whether Trump is disqualified from the presidency because of his conduct on January 6th.
Mitt Romney, right? Rich, voted to impeach, and started hiring security because he could.
Now to Utah Senator Mitt Romney. The 2012 GOP presidential nominee announced he will not run for re-election next year and will retire from the Senate.
Everyone besides Peter Meyer and Mitt Romney can't afford that personal security to defend against the mob, and so many of them capitulate. Many of them just get terrified and give in. It is terrifying. It is absolutely terrifying. And I talked to a lot of people who've been the primary victim, not the most obvious. I've never spoken to Hunter Biden.
The New York Post has already published aerial photographs of where I live.
That's not why I do the Hunter Biden stuff. But I've talked to other key victims of this story, and most of them are like, I have managed to rebuild my life after being targeted by Donald Trump, and I'm not willing to invoke that wrath again. If everyone who had been targeted by Donald Trump came out on the same day and said, I'm not going to do it anymore, none of us are going to do it anymore, there'd be too many targets for the mob, right? There'd be too many people for the mob to hit. But Donald Trump just serially targets one after another person, and they become the focus of the mob. And then, like these jurors who just voted to convict Donald Trump, they're being doxxed as we speak. They don't have private security. What is going to happen to these people? What is going to happen to these people when the entire mob of the Republican Party starts going after them? And I don't know the answer to that. And how do we tie that mob violence to Donald Trump? Here's the trick. It actually is genuinely hard, with the exception of one or two people like Tyler Toronto.
A U.S. Navy veteran. He was arrested last week outside former President Obama's Washington, D.C. neighborhood. Nearby, federal agents say they found his van with 2 guns, hundreds of rounds of ammunition, and a machete.
He's a veteran, suffers from mental illness, joined in January 6th, and then one day on Truth Social took the address that Donald Trump himself RT'd for Barack Obama. And then this mentally ill man who had been trained in the military starts stalking Barack Obama's neighborhood.
But there are other issues on the table right now. They're seeking to have Toronto held in jail, alleging he threatened to detonate a vehicle. Against Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin, who you might recall led the second Trump impeachment.
His January 6 crimes were just trespassing. Same with the guy who attacked the Cincinnati FBI office, by the way.
An armed man who allegedly tried to break into FBI Cincinnati field office was shot and killed by police during an hours-long standoff today. The suspect has been identified as 42-year-old Ricky Schiffer. So what do we know about this man?
According to CNN, a social media account with his name shows a post made referencing an attempt to storm an FBI office. It was published on Truth Social, Donald Trump's platform.
He was being investigated for low-level crimes on January 6th. And then he goes postal one day and kits himself out and tries to break into the Cincinnati FBI office after Trump's house was searched.
Federal investigators say Schiffer might have had ties to far-right extremist groups, including the
Proud Boys. Stand back and stand by.
It's stochastic terrorism. You can't hold Trump accountable because he lied. Now prosecutors are trying to deal with the fact that Trump lied about the FBI having an assassination attempt on him when they went to his Florida house knowing full well he was in New Jersey.
Donald Trump's campaign has used lies without any shame to mobilize and animate and energize its supporters. But believe me when I tell you that this time it's different. Disinformation of a stripe and variety that goes well beyond the size of his crowds or his golf scores. A dangerous lie this time. Trump's entirely false assertion that the Department of Justice authorized the FBI to use deadly force in its 2022 court-approved search of Mar-a-Lago. That lie has exploded. Watch.
This was an attempted assassination attempt on Donald John Trump.
It's just nonsense. Unfortunately, because of the way the First Amendment works in the United States, it's very hard to say to Donald Trump, even as a criminal defendant, especially if Aileen Cannon is presiding over his case, it's very hard to say, you can't lie and in the process ratchet up your mob to attack the FBI office in Cincinnati, to start stalking Barack Obama's house. And there are a good many members of Trump's mob who, at least until the guilty verdicts, had given up the ghost because they saw how many people were prosecuted after January 6th. I think that may change given how much Trump is ratcheting up the grievance. But you're always going to have a Ricky Schiffer. You're always going to have a guy, that one guy who decides to kid himself out personally and go try and take down the Cincinnati FBI office. Or this guy, Tyler Toronto, unwell. I can't count the number of January 6th defendants who have a genuine diagnosed mental illness, or many of them PTSD from fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan. And they are much more susceptible to Trump's stochastic terrorism. They just are.
This is Democracy Now!, Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman. The Armed Services Committee of the House held a hearing Wednesday on extremism in the U.S. military to look at how nearly 1 in 5 people who are facing charges related to the deadly January 6th insurrection at the Capitol had served or are serving in the military, including at least 2 active duty troops. One of the experts asked to testify at Wednesday's hearing was Leisha Brooks, chief of staff at the Southern Poverty Law Center, who said the military has long failed to adequately address far-right extremism in the ranks.
Let me begin with 2 distinct points. First, the vast majority of those who serve in our armed forces have no connection to white supremacy or extremism and strive always to uphold the best traditions of our nation's democratic ideals. Second, the military has a growing problem with white supremacy and extremism, because our country does.